Let's go. Okay, we are back live again. The MMA AllStar. Actually, the AllStar MMA. Why do I say it backwards, man? It's just, I think yesterday's event just has my brain just boggled and just shaken up, you know what I mean, somewhat. Of course, a lot of surprises and a lot of, things that happened that you thought was going to happen, you know what I mean? There was a weird injury stoppage as well. But before we get into the whole card, this podcast will probably be a little bit longer than the previous because there's so much to go over, especially the main event. Man, we're gonna talk so much shit about the main event, and we got every level of, like, we got supporters, we got haters, we got detractors, we got them all today, right? Because we got Pat joining us, filling in for Sicko, and Pat is a guy that I've known for a while, and I've always known him as a guy that doesn't filter his thoughts, and he's never filtered his thoughts on Israel Adesanya. And we're going to get into this fight right now, the main event, UFC 293 in Sydney. A lot of people are calling it like the biggest upset of all time. And could you argue that? I don't know. We'll get into that later. But Pat, I'm going to give you the floor, man. You say what you have to say before we react to your thoughts.
I'm just gonna just sip this for a minute, just take my time.
Is that the hater? Is that Haterade? Is that?
Oh Haterade? Yeah, that's Haterade. That's Haterade for sure. Oh yeah, no, it's yeah. I mean, it's wonderful to see. It's finally we can drop the is Adesanya the middleweight GOAT talk, which was way too premature. I mean, I will give Adesanya his due. He's an amazing striker. He's probably the second best middleweight, right? Like he's really good. I'm not going to deny that. But the talk going into this and the way that this was packaged by both the UFC and the media was, I mean, he beats Strickland and he gets a couple more title defenses. Is he the middleweight GOAT? And you had people arguing yes and no. And there were a fair amount of supporters for that. And it made no sense at all. And my favorite thing is in the video packages, right? The big highlight they like to show is the Poatan bow and arrow knockout, because it's his most recent one, just completely glossing over the fact that Poatan has beaten him 3 times across 2 other combat sports, right? Like, just don't care because they want to pump him up as this amazing thing. So for this to happen, especially in this way, is just like, there goes your money machine, UFC. There goes like any talk of him being the middleweight GOAT. I mean, it wasn't a flash knockout. It was a straight up beat down for 5 rounds where Strickland lost 1 round, but it was like pretty ho-hum. And I've been saying this forever. People are like, Izzy's a machine, whatever. Like, go watch the Romero fight if you can stay awake. Go watch Whitaker 2 if you could stay awake. People forget the Cannonier fight, which was just a couple ago. People walked out because they were so bored. And that was more at least like him being technical, so I'll give him that. But he's not some crazy, unbeatable machine. If you pressure him and you're able to check the leg kicks and get him in the pocket, he doesn't know what to do. He throws wild. He backs up against the fence. It's what Gastelum did, and Gastelum's chin failed him during the fight, but like that's why Gastelum had as much success as he did. It's what Pereira did the first time, and it's what Strickland did this last time. And I mean, it's still crazy to me that I still see people trying to call him the GOAT, still trying to give him the props. He's great, but you cannot call him the GOAT. You can't. He's 1-2 in his last 3 fights, and he lost to Sean Strickland. And Strickland deserves all the credit in the world, but let's not act like Strickland wasn't 2-2 coming into this title fight, right? Like he's not some crazy up and comer. He got beat down by Jared in a split decision that was close, but then he got knocked out by Pereira. I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. I just finally we can put the GOAT conversation to rest. They've pushed this guy as much as they can, and Izzy also, didn't even speak at the press conference, right? He just kind of ducked out. And it was like, don't Ronda Rousey this, right? Like but number one, Izzy Hater. I'm vying for that. So vote for me on all the social media platforms. I'm sure there's an award show, But yeah, I'm just here sipping my tea, so to speak. Just having,
Yes.
I told
His
you.
haterade. He's got the haterade.
Haterade. Yeah, yeah.
There's a big old tub of it somewhere in his house.
Oh yeah.
He just
Just wake up in the morning, just pour some, just
He's at his own cooler at his house. He's doing his own cooler talk.
Oh yeah.
At his house, yeah, man. There's gonna be a lot more we could dive into, right? But Adesanya, he's a great fighter. He's a great striker. Arguably one of the best strikers we've ever seen inside that octagon, right? With the tools that he has, the style that he has, the strategy that he implements. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of fighters are the extension of their coaching staff, right? Their team, right? So you got to give their team credit as well. And they prepared him. And if you listen to what Eugene Behrman said after the fight, he said that they just couldn't get in sync, right? It was just like the corner couldn't get in sync with Adesanya. They weren't seeing, Adesanya wasn't seeing the same thing that the corner was seeing. So when they were yelling out instructions, they weren't in sync. There's a lot of things that, and I like that Eugene Behrman said that. He could have just said, like, Sean Strickland is a great fighter. He had a great strategy and he won, but he kind of dove into like exactly like what was going on. I like that, because I've never seen a coach come out and say that. Have you seen that, J-Spec? A coach come out and say after a fight that there was just the communication was bad, and this is with the biggest fight you could have in the UFC. It's a title fight, main event, pay-per-view in your own country, right? Like, I like that transparency. J-Spec, what do you think? What did you think of the fight, and then what did you think of Eugene's comments?
I'm so excited. I'm knocking mics around over here. You know what I mean? Can't wait to get to my opinion on this. Dude, this fight has so much to talk about. You guys had so many great points. Well done, Pat, John. Man, I don't even know how to enter this. It's so crazy. It's pure chaos, just like the event itself, like the result. Now, do I think, or have I seen something like that before? Not directly in the pure honesty that you're talking about I'm going to be very direct, and it was the communication. We were not in sync out there. I think that may be a first, especially in a world title fight like this. Now, we've seen other coaches be transparent and shield their fighter a little bit, because I think there's a little bit of that too. Is he's not around to answer nothing? Is his right? I mean, I give him hey, if you know nothing's good going to come out of your mouth, it's probably best to avoid the microphone. So who's left? He's the next biggest representative of the whole city kickboxing tribe, who other than Izzy had a fucking terrific night. So it was just a good call by a good coach, in my opinion, to do a coach-like thing, put the blame a little bit on him, and put a summary to it, which is respectable and, like you said, honest, and we can live with it. Now, on the other hand, though, like, what? This is, you guys been working together for a long ass time. How the hell did the communication go wrong here in your hometown, so to speak, and all that other stuff? It's not like you got jet lag. I don't understand. Well, how could you fumble it that bad? How could the corner work be so bad that the championship was lost? I think there's more to it than that. On the other side, while we were watching the show, we were running the space and enjoying the fights together. Dude, I heard the direct opposite type of thinking coming from Strickland's corner. I think it was like round 3 or so. They actually said, and I'm quoting roughly, dude, we can win this. Dude, we can win this is the fucking opposite.
That's like Stifler.
Yeah, like, dude, we can win this. I mean, bro, that's gold right there. So
Sean Strickland is Stifler from American Pie. I just realized that right now. We have Stifler from American Pie as the UFC champion.
Yeah,
just think about Stifler if he could fight. That's basically what. That's basically what. I think Sean Strickland would have been a Stifler when he was young. You know what I mean?
I just realized a bunch of weird MMA heads started looking up for Strickland's mom. Anyways, MILF story going on from that movie. Now, going back to the fight, I don't know what else was going on, but I can tell you this: the proverbial that long overused quote from Mike Tyson, that is, about once you get punched, there goes the game plan, some shit like that. I know it's been quoted and misquoted 100 times, so I'm doing my own version, but that's exactly what happened. Mr. Strickland went out there, punched Adesanya dead ass in the mouth, sat him down, and that we entered a different universe at that point. The Adesanya, the master fighter, the all this other shit, it wasn't there anymore. It was a regular guy versus another guy, and Strickland was the man on that night. Everything that is Adesanya disappeared right after that knockdown, and that's to me the beginning and ending of the fight right there. It's all right there. He put up a good effort in the second round. I think Pat talked about winning a round for Mr. Adesanya. That was it. But other than that, we were here. I just want to take this last moment. I want to pull a Eugene Behrman. Last week, I was here saying, dude, Adesanya has 100 different ways to kick Strickland's ass. I'm not really sure what Strickland's going to do. Like, boy, was I wrong. So I take that L, throw the dub up for Strickland, and there you go. That's my thoughts on that.
Well, there's been, experts that broke this fight down ahead of the fight that were picking Adesanya to win it. So, it's just picking fights is just picking fights. You got to just look more than just the pick. You got to look at the analysis of the pick, right? Yeah, man, it was a insane night, insane main event. I don't want to say insane, but because it wasn't like, oh my God, like, it wasn't like the Matt Serra knockout where it was just like all of a sudden, unsurprisingly, he knocked out GSP, right? The first round, let's go into the fight. Let's talk about the fight now. The first round was probably the most impactful round, so to say, right? Because Sean Strickland was able to land that 1-2 straight down the pipe and land so clean and dropped Adesanya in that first round. But before that, before the knockdown, because that was at the end of the round, who did you see winning that round, Pat? The first round.
I had Strickland barely. Like, it was super close, but he was landing what I would say were the more impactful shots. I mean, it was, if somebody had scored it up to that point for Izzy, I wouldn't have been angry about it. But I thought he was landing more and he was pressuring more, and it was close enough, right, that it was kind of like, well, if strikes are being equal, then technically it goes to the guy. You go through the next three things, and there were no takedowns, no clinch, whatever. Like, technically goes to the guy who's pressuring. So I was leaning Strickland anyway. And it was one of those things where just the way he was checking the kicks and putting Adesanya in the back foot and occasionally throwing a bigger shot, I think he took it. But I mean, that knockdown obviously changed everything, because then it was about as clear as day for Strickland as it was going to be.
Yeah, I don't think, J-Spec, he mentioned the knockdown earlier and kind of emphasized on that and how that was the alternate universe that Eugene Behrman was talking about, how like Strickland was going to win the title, right? He buzzed him hard. Strickland buzzed him hard, man. And he took like what? It looked like 20 shots, right? 20 shots of just him against the fence, just trying to move around and dodge everything. And he took clean shots, man. And I think a possibility is that after that segment of the fight, Adesanya maybe was on cruise control. And that's why we saw the type of performance that we saw. That's why maybe he couldn't get in sync with this corner. I don't know. I'm not trying to make excuses for Adesanya, but maybe, because we hear that all the time, right, from fighters. Fighters get buzzed, they get knocked down, they get clipped, and then they talk about how they don't remember the rest of the fight. They don't even remember going backstage. They remember waking up in the hotel and say like, oh shit, what happened? Like, did I fight? Like, like shit like that. Like, that's crazy shit, right? And that could have been a possibility, but all credit to Sean Strickland, because Sean Strickland is the one who buzzed him, right? Like in the first round early, and a buzzed, like injured Adesanya in a type of situation like that, where you got a style like Sean Strickland, it's not good at all in that situation, right? It's not good at all. And he did a great job of cutting off the cage, You know what I mean? Like that, I think that was the key to it, and kind of like leading Adesanya to go where he wanted to go, like he wanted him to go, right? Eric Nixick, his coach, did a great job of planning that stuff out. People that are listening right now live, keep the comments coming. We'll get to the comments soon. And also make sure you guys go in the descriptions and download the AllStar app. I got the app on the screen right now, showing the statistics for the fight. And man, Sean Strickland, nobody fucking thought that this was gonna happen, right? Like
No.
every time somebody that has kind of like a boxing style, they go out there and win a big fight, everybody's jumping on, like saying who's the best boxer in MMA. They always talk about that, right? And on Twitter, like I just put up nonsense because that's what Twitter's about. Like, and people think it's serious. Like I always put up nonsense and be like, you're so consistent in the worst takes. I'm like, because it's nonsense, right? I put it up because everybody Dustin Poirier wins. Oh, he's the best boxer in MMA. Max Holloway wins. He's the best boxer in MMA, right? It's like everybody has a boxing style. It's like they're the best boxer in MMA after they win. Sean Strickland has a title. Maybe now he's the best boxer in MMA. I don't know, right? Like, and then people are going to get mad about that. Anyways, it doesn't matter. The statistics show Sean Strickland went in there, implemented an incredible game plan, attacked, and almost fought his perfect fight against the champ and became the champ. That's just clearly what happened, right? Let's say Adesanya on his best day, would he be able to? Would Strickland be able to beat Izzy on his best day? Probably not. But it doesn't matter. It was yesterday. It was UFC 293. That's when you have to be your best self, right? And Sean Strickland was perfect on the night that he was supposed to be perfect. And it's almost like, ahead of the fight, like everybody's talking about how Adesanya pushed for this fight, right? The UFC didn't want Sean Strickland to fight for the title. And it was almost like they were leading a lamb to slaughter. And Sean Strickland was almost playing into it, right? Like ahead of the fight, like, oh, I'm just going to go out there. I'm not going to, maybe I'll wrestle. I don't know. But he played into it. And he just like played everybody like idiots. And,
well, John, I mean, talk about stuff have you ever seen before? Have you ever seen a foreigner in a outside nation, whatever, for the challenger of a championship against a decorated champion get the crowd behind the visitor? That's absurd, dude. Like,
well, a lot of people hate Izzy in Australia, so
Yeah, I mean it's weird because I saw a couple takes about that, and like having lived in Australia for a year and then visiting New Zealand, like they have a weird rivalry. Like I'm not super shocked that they like the Aussie crowd got behind Strickland, right? Because like I don't know a real good analogy for it, but it's like, I mean, I could easily see the Aussie crowd going for a challenger just because it's
there was guys in the street in Australia telling Sean Strickland to knock out Izzy.
Yeah.
Like this was a very common thing. Like, oh, when are you gonna knock him out? What round are you gonna knock him out? Because they weren't talking about are you gonna beat him? They're like asking him to knock him out, right? So he does have a lot of haters, and man, I wish I had that many haters because that means you'd be making more money. You know what I mean? Like, Izzy, like, he got haters, man. He's become this figure of like, there's a lot of people that love him, but then there's equal amount of people that hate him, and that's what you want as a public figure, as a star, as a athlete, as a actor, whatever you want to be, right? Like, fame has something to do with it, right? And more fame, more money, and Adesanya understands that, right? I think Adesanya, the way he handled everything after the fight, there's a reason. This is my theory. I feel like the reason why he did that is because he can take everything, all this attention that people are waiting for, and bring it to his channel. And he's going to release something on his channel, and everybody has to watch that and write articles off that and, refer back to that instead of the press conference. Because they already wrote about the press conference, right? Like his little, 1 minute thing with the media, and then he left, and then he posted something on his social media. They already wrote articles about that, right? Now they're going to have to wait for him on his own platform. And I think fighters can learn from that, right? Fighters can learn from that. And Izzy, he knows what he's doing. Even though he lost the fight, but he didn't really lose You know, I mean, he lost the belt, yes, but man, he made a ton of money. And now, what the question I have is the first round. I would give a 10-8 in that first round. The reason why, okay, I'm gonna ask you guys too. The reason why I would give a 10-8 is because man, he almost finished the fight in the first round, and before that almost finishing sequence, the fight was either close or Sean Strickland was landing, like you said, Pat, the harder shots. So when you got a fight up to that point where it's kind of close, but Sean Strickland looks like he's winning, landing the harder shots, and then he almost finishes the fight, how could you not, Pat, how could you not give that a 10-8? You almost finished the fight.
I mean, like it's weird, right? Like 10-8s are so weird to me. And like, I could go on a whole separate rant about how people think they know about judging criteria and all that garbage. Like, I don't even want to get into that, but like, I will say, like, especially upon watching it the first time, right? Like Goddard could have stopped that if it wasn't the champ. Like I've seen refs go in and stop the fight for less. And if it wasn't the champ and giving like Izzy the benefit of the doubt, especially the amount of shots he ate, and then when he just turned to face the cage and just 8 shots, and like he gave a little thumbs up, but that doesn't. Usually, it's like you got to fight back, you got to do something, right? But he took that knockdown, he got up, he ate those shots, and then he immediately circled back out, right, for the last like 10 seconds. And like kept fighting. I think if Izzy is on the ground, like where Goddard is literally about to pull him off, and then like the round ends, that's a different story. But I think because of that, it's going to be like a knockdown and like a bit of a beatdown, but not, like Strickland didn't bloody him up or hurt him so bad he couldn't move. Like he was just covering up, and then he still circled out. So I can see a 10-9. Like I gave it a 10-9 just because Izzy recovered quick enough that it's like it's hard to say. But I wouldn't be like angry if somebody gave it a 10-8, because you're right. Like I've seen fights stop for less, like a lot less. It was a championship fight. He got the benefit.
Yeah. The other rounds, they, like it's a 10-9 round. But the first round, I think you could argue that it could have been a 10-8 round. J-Spec, what do you think?
I think that the 10-8 round thing is so unclear and so like odd when they do it and then they don't, that I don't even have a comfortable like portion to sample from of like what I feel very confident defining what a 10-8 round is right now. I know it's supposed to be kicking ass, and I wouldn't just because I guess it's supposed to be very, a lot of damage. And I get it. He got popped. He got dropped. He was getting rained on. But there was a portion of that assault where Strickland was just kind of, arm punching him, if you will. It wasn't the cleanest thing. It was just, he was chest on him, just trying to muscle him out. And I can also see that it is the first round. So why just, like, it's not like Adesanya's been taking an ass kicking the whole time and then this happened and you're trying to save his brain. This is early into the fight. So I think the non-stoppage, if you will, was totally fine. I do agree with Pat, though, that we have seen other fights stopped for less. But all those things considered, who we're talking about, main event, championship, first round, maybe also part of the mix. I'm cool with it not being stopped. But 10-8, no, I'm fine. I'm fine with it being 10-9 because honestly, hate to be the contrarian, I remember that round kind of being, I was more for Adesanya. And then that moment happened, and I was like, oh, shit, well, then I'm not even going to talk about this round anymore. This is clearly Strickland's round. So I just kind of erased everything before that because it was just so clearly Strickland's round at that point.
And the rules do state that it's like they have to basically be overwhelmingly dominating striking. And so like I wouldn't classify round one as overwhelming, right? Like I had it for Strickland for a little bit more impactful, but it wasn't, it wasn't like he was completely like destroying Izzy in striking. It was back and forth enough that yeah. And duration, I know like the 3Ds for like duration, like again, it was maybe like 20 seconds. It wasn't, if that had gone on for like, say that happens in like round or like a minute into the round and then the rest of the round is like that or something. Well, yeah, that's a 10-8 for sure. But I mean, there were 20 seconds, 30 seconds left or whatever. It's kind of hard to give it a 10-8 thinking about it more, but
yeah. Well, it's always unclear, man. Let's get into these comments before we move on to more of this juicy card, because there has been some weirdness on this card. Spawn Fritz, hi Spawn, how you doing? Hype MMA, what a night for Sean. Of course, it was a night for Sean. Preston saying, love the hate, Pat. LOL.
yes.
Preston is always with us. Preston Izzy also said he had a game plan, and that was he was going to knock Sean out. Where was this so-called game plan? Well, every fighter says their game plan of like, oh, I'm going to submit or knock out. I'm going for this. It's just the normal talk. Up his ass, along his head. With his head, yes. Hype. Sean negates the attacks from Izzy so well. Strickland deserves more fight. Strickland definitely. Yeah, Hype, you're right. He agrees. And new EQ is here. Let's see what else Okay, here's This says, can Izzy beat Strick on his best day? Obviously not. This is us surreal. I think more. What is he saying? I think more damage to his face, like the eye cut or something, that changed the outcome of the fight. All right, there you go. So everybody, yeah, man, I picked on the app. I picked Adesanya to win by a knockout in round 3. This is my pick that I had. This is what I thought would happen. I thought it would take some time for him to kind of, I think Sean's not a guy that you're going to put out in the first round, right? He's a guy that's going to take some time to beat up. And I thought it was going to happen in the 3rd round, but it didn't, man. Because, on Adesanya's best day, I think he beat Strickland, but that wasn't his best day, and Strickland came out and did his thing. Props to him. Now, the talk of the town is, and a lot of people are saying, Pat, you probably agree, Adesanya does not get the immediate rematch, even though Dana White has already said that he gets the immediate rematch. J-Spec, let's start with you first. Who gets the next fight at middleweight for the title?
So I think that we can solve so many things with like just a couple maneuvers. One, I'm back up Pat 100%. Izzy is not the middleweight GOAT. That is Israel Adesanya, kids, ladies and gentlemen. But that doesn't mean that Izzy can easily be the best fighter of this generation and of this chapter, because he's in a very interesting opportunity to become he would be the first 3-time, right? There's been no 3-time middleweight champ before. So that's like cool greatness in your own different path, in your own different unique way. And so I think Adesanya should fight the fight that everybody wants to see, even though I didn't really like it. Fight the Dricus fight whenever. I know people want Dricus versus Strickland. The reality is you can have fresh matchups right now for another easy pathway back to a big fight. So let Strickland fight literally whoever. And the juice is already there for Literally, let him fight literally whoever. I don't like, as long as you make weight, dude, make weight.
Conor McGregor? Greg McGregor's talking about moving up.
I bet he thinks he could win that fight too.
Oh, so, he definitely does, which is amazing. Yeah.
So, I mean, let's be honest. At this point, the middleweight defense with Strickland will sell with whoever you want, and then put Adesanya versus DDP because, I mean, let's face it.
Really?
Come on.
As a non-title fight?
Yes, because the heat is already there. If you're not
the hate is already there.
If you're not going to give DDP Strickland, that's what I'm saying. If you're not going to do DDP Strickland, then DDP Adesanya. And that's what I'm saying. It's not that hard, and it's super interesting. Whoever wins, no matter what happens, you have another title fight that's super interesting. Problem solved, man.
I think Adesanya, he probably won't even take the rematch. Pat, what do you think?
So, I mean, this is one of those things where, does he deserve the rematch? No, not at all. Especially, this was not another, Poetan fifth round knockout where like Izzy was up on the cards and then lost. And it wasn't like if Adesanya gets flash KO'd by Strickland in round 1, there's a little bit more of an argument. Like, oh, you caught him with the punch. But like, this was domination enough. There's no no way that he should be getting the rematch. What will actually happen, though, is I unfortunately know the UFC too well. And unless Izzy does turn down the rematch, which he may, if he's really worried about, like, if he, let's say he wasn't buzzed at all, or like he recovered enough and then he just couldn't figure Strickland out, he may turn it down so he gets more time to like figure out a new game plan or try and figure out what to do there. But unless Izzy turns it down, they'll for sure do the rematch. And Dana's already kind of tipped his hand there because you've got a media rights deal coming up, in a year, less than a year, where the negotiating period starts after the end of this year. And you're trying to make a ton of money off of that. They're trying to double what they're getting from ESPN right now, either through ESPN or, some other provider. The overall market for streaming deals right now is not great. Like a lot of layoffs, they're cutting. Everybody wants them to be profitable. They've just been like, hey, throw money at it for years. And now it's like, hey, you actually have to make money. And it's causing a huge issue in the streaming world. And Izzy is a star, right? Izzy is arguably their biggest star right now who actually fights regularly. Like McGregor is always going to be bigger. Jones can be bigger, but he's also been not as big depending on the fight. I think the Anthony Smith
record.
Yeah, well, yeah, all of that too. Yes. But Izzy is a huge draw, especially in the Oceania region and international buys. And they, of course, want him as champion because if he's not, like, think about trying to sell a media rights deal right now with Sean Strickland as your champ. And you're trying to negotiate with ESPN, who is owned by Disney. Think about that for a second. Like,
Disney I don't know if you care though, do they?
Oh, they do. Disney almost bought the UFC. They came this close to buying the UFC instead of Endeavor. It didn't happen because Bob Iger, who was the CEO and is now the CEO again after a whole crazy succession type switch up that happened last year, he's CEO again. He nixed it because it didn't think it fit in with the family image. He regrets it, like, pretty much, and like they're losing money on it now, especially since ESPN is paying for the media rights deal. But like, I mean, same way that they stepped in when Dana tried to have that event in California when COVID happened, right? Like, I mean, they have a certain level of they'll get grilled to a certain degree, especially if you have a subsidiary or a partner doing some outlandish stuff. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Sean Strickland memes out there or like the edits of him winning and saying stuff or his post-fight press conference, but that is a PR nightmare for Disney and UFC, which is now going to be merged with WWE in 2 days. And WWE has this whole family-friendly image too, right? Like it's not a good time from a business standpoint. They 100% didn't think this was going to happen. So I can't imagine that Izzy isn't offered the rematch, and they wouldn't do that if they could.
How is MMA going to be family friendly? Like, to me, that's hard to sell, to be honest with you. It's just too violent.
It's my guess is I don't think it's going to be family friendly, so to speak, but it's going to be polished more towards when they were like with the Fox deal, right? They're going to be talking more about like, remember when they had the Fox deal and then they put out the code of conduct and like actually enforced it with a couple of fighters, I think Matt Mitrione and a couple things, right? And like they tried to make it more like, hey, this is like we have the same rules and type of professionalism as a big sport, right? Like we're on Fox, we've got to have that. Like they're going to try and do that again, would be my guess. It's not going to work, super well, and they're not going to make it as friendly as WWE is because WWE is obviously scripted and has a lot more power in that regard. But I would imagine you're going to get a much more polished product than what we've seen, especially because they'll be half of the company's revenue, and they'll need to crush it on the media rights deal. Otherwise, if they don't crush it on the media rights deal, it's a very bad time for that new company. So at least until that's done, they're going to go for it. If you ink that deal, I think then everything's out the window, right? Like you could do a code of conduct, what have you, sign the deal, and then all of a sudden, like, nobody enforces it. Okay. But the fact that two fighters two fighters said homophobic slurs in their post-fight stuff, and then you've got Strickland, who is now your champ. That is going to be during a time when media companies are going to be looking for any excuse to push back on paying more. I guarantee they're going to go in on the UFC for that. Like, there's no way they don't.
Yeah, well, that they'll probably use that to knock off a couple million here and there.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
They 100% will say that at the negotiating table. So
yeah.
They want UFC wants Izzy back as champ ASAP. Same reason they want Weili as champ. Same reason they want Sean as champ. Sean O'Malley as champ. They want draws as champions. People they could put up and go to their, when they go on tour, they could be like, look at our champs. Like, they can come meet with Weili and Sean O'Malley and Adesanya and see what we're doing and all, like, right? Like,
yeah,
they do not.
They can be great ambassadors. They can be great ambassadors for the sport.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, Sean Strickland cannot be a great ambassador for the sport.
He's a loose cannon, and like Izzy, he has his loose cannon moments, but when it's time for business, he's a businessman. And Sean O'Malley is the same, right? He has his moments of ridiculousness, but when it's business time, he's a businessman. And that's who they want. That's what the UFC wants. They want guys that are businessmen when it's business time, right? And you could do your old little promotion thing on your own, but when it's time to do your thing, do your thing. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But I think Sean Strickland, he has this unique opportunity right now, right? To have the middle America, to have like the average Joe, the blue collar worker. I think he could have that demographic behind him, and that demographic is massive in America, right? Middle America, like getting like fathers that are raising kids, because he has some ideologies that a lot of people in the Middle America might agree with, right? And he could use the positive ones to propel him rather than the ridiculous ones, right? Like I think he can do it. It's just, how can he do it? And could he get a PR team behind him to do it? Because he's a champion now. So why not? If you're the UFC, try to help Sean Strickland clean it up a little bit and make more money. But I don't think Sean Strickland would do that. That's the thing.
No.
Yes, man, what do you think?
Opposite. You fucking inject this fucker with crack and you send him out and you let him just whatever flies and bullshit he attracts. That's what you get. That's the media storm that's gonna come from it. You're not gonna. Well, what are we gonna do? We're gonna put a suit and tie on Strickland now. We're gonna give him PR lessons. We're gonna teach him not to say
no. You don't put a suit and tie on him. He's the blue collar champion.
Yeah,
so he wears his boots. He's Carhartt is sponsoring him. You know what I mean? Dickies is sponsoring him. You know what I mean? Like that type of level of like. I wish that they would do that. That would be the plan that I would have for Sean Strickland. As just it could be 6 months, it could be a year, right? Just try to squeeze out as much as you can to build a fan base bigger. And then when you're not champion, it still rides with you, right? Most of the time.
That could totally work. I mean, it could if you want to push that. I think the guy is a instant agitator. I think he could piss off any group at any time. And I mean, like any group, like even that group, even that so-called group. So with that being said, like use him like that. I in my mind, that's the way you would mark. I would just let him just talk shit in every direction and listen. There's only so much love that can be generated for purchases. Some people purchase for hate. People purchase to see knockouts. You just let that guy go out there and piss off as many people as he can. They're going to buy. And they want to see his face get punched in. And he might not. And he might. Who knows? You got to buy it to find out. And that's, boom, fight game. Everything's solved. I don't know.
I don't think that he will get to that level of, like, people hating him that much. I don't think he's capable of that. You know what I mean? Like, because he does everything in tongue-in-cheek. Everything's just like, oh, John, I'm not really saying it, like he backtracks a lot.
John, you and I get that kind of stuff, but dude, let's be honest. The the modern society just takes clips and holds on to it forever. They don't care about apologies or didn't say that or whatever. He's an anti-Semite forever, even though, or whatever the connotation that's thrown at him. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways,
there's a clip right now that's circulating that basically chops up all the terrible things he said and puts it all in one thing, and it's going around. And it's
wow.
I mean, if that's the thing is like, and I've seen multiple people on social media post and be like, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like he says some of it tongue in cheek, but like he says enough things that cross enough lines, he could easily get everyone to hate him. He basically had that whole press conference where he was like, we got to go back to 1958 and women shouldn't be allowed to vote, which isn't correct. Women were allowed to vote in 1920. I mean, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Educated.
He's not, he's not educated at all. But like, it's one of those things where like he could certainly, I think Jay Speck is right that like, I think if you're going to push him, you push him as like everybody, you push him the Greg Hardy route, right? Like everybody just wants to see him get beat up. Everybody just wants to see him get knocked out. But I also think he's so much of a loose cannon and he has a traumatic brain injury. Like, right? Like that changes everything because that TBI clearly is affecting him. I had an uncle with that who basically like got in a similar type of thing, got in a car crash, and like it changes you. Apparently, like I didn't know him before it happened that much, right? But like from everybody I've talked to, and he wasn't affected that badly, but like they're like, oh, he changed and he's just different now. And he like, and when you hear Strickland talk about that, and he's just like, he just flows. There is no filter at all. It's like he can't do it. It's like it literally just pops out. And so you can sell the right. you can sell the hate, but like it's also no media rights company, right, wants to be like, imagine, right, there was a joke going around, right, that he was going to say like the N-word, right? Like that was like the whole, like no media company wants to actually put somebody on that would do that. It's, and that's the problem with Strickland is he's just too loose, and I don't think you can push him in that way. And I think it's just a scenario where they're just hoping that he either is basically put on the shelf until he fights and he doesn't do any, like he does the normal press conferences and like that stuff, or they, are trying to get him out of there. And I think that's part of what the Izzy rematch is.
I'm just going to jump in and say Strickland, I hear people who are good at striking criticize his guard, criticize the way he fights, criticize the way he talks. His little gimmick, his shtick, I always label it as like comedian gone wild. I think that's the role he plays. And I'm not fully sold that he's like, I know he's a loose cannon and he says inflammatory stuff and stuff I wouldn't say, but I think he also has, to a degree, just like his funny ass guard, like he knows what he's doing. I think he has just enough control. I don't think he would botch himself out of really good money and say the N-word and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, I think he has just enough. You think he would? I don't know.
I think if you get him in a certain situation and certain type of flow of conversation, it could come out. Like, it's just a certain emotion comes out. You trigger him, it could come. You know what I mean? Like, do we want it to happen? No, but a lot of bad things have happened throughout the years, right? Like people saying the dumbest shit at the wrong time, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully it doesn't, like something like that doesn't happen while he's the champion. You know what I mean? Just because I just don't want that to be part of like what the sport is, like drawing attention for. You know what I mean? Like you don't want them to draw attention. You want them to be on ESPN top 5. That's how you want them to be drawing attention, not because of what they say. But this sport has become 50, like especially in the UFC, it's like 50% making headlines and 50% fighting now. Seriously, like it's like fighters have become their own media group. You know what I mean? They got their own teams now, right? Certain fighters that they like respond to, like how many channels are going to respond to Israel losing to Sean Strickland, and that'll become headlines. Sean O'Malley says this. Gilbert Burns says that, you know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. Whoever has channel says this, you know what I mean? Like, it's just going to be all over the place, you know? John McCarthy said this, you know what I mean? Josh Thompson said that, you know what I mean? It's just, that's what the media has become now. Like, the fighters are starting to figure it out themselves and say, like, yo, we don't need these idiots sitting in their basements reporting on us. We report on ourselves, and we make everything, and we draw all the attention, right? So it could happen. Anyways, we could go on for this for like 3 hours, just this fight and like everything.
Yeah.
But we got to move on and cover some of the other card. But before we go there, let's get into some of these comments. Let's see. Spawn says Izzy got the UFC 5 curse. That's true. They just released it last week, right? And Izzy was on the cover. Who else was on the cover? Valentina
Vulcan.
and Volk.
Yeah. But Izzy dodged the UFC 4 curse, right? Wasn't he on the cover? So, I mean.
So it doesn't matter, man.
Yeah.
But Jorge got it. Jorge got it.
That's true. Yeah.
Charisma. What's going on? The people didn't believe in Strickland. God did. That's right. That's the best time to say God did. Yes. I wish Strickland would have said that. That would have been funny, right? With a do-rag on or something. What else is there? Yeah, so like, yeah, man, that was, to me, that was a, you know, that's why you watch fighting, because anything can happen, right? If we knew this was going to happen, if we knew that Sean Strickland was going to get the upset, would we watch it? Probably not, because it's like, why would you like watch fights after they already happened, unless it's like you really want to see it, you know what I mean? It was entertaining or something like that. But yeah, man, it's incredible. Everybody, make sure you guys go in the descriptions, download the AllStar app, and we're going to put the app back on the screen and talk about the co-main event between Tai Tuivasa and Volkov. I took Tai Tuivasa first round knockout, because I always take Tai Tuivasa first round knockout. That's just always my pick. The reason why I'm going to tell you is not because like technically I was like analyzing this matchup and saying like, wow, this, you know, the striking and the ground game, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not because of that. It's because I like Tai. And he's a cool dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I like him. Like, that's just the only reason I picked him. I'm just going to give you real. Like, if I was picking because of like skill, of course I would have took Volkov, right? Because like you'd figure Volkov's just on a better run. And he's just so big, and you know what I mean? Like the last time he ran into a Russian, it didn't go so well, right? So you figured like if he doesn't clip him, it's not gonna go so well. And that's what happened in this fight. But let's look at the statistics. Statistics show that, man, look at the gap, dude, in statistics. Strikes landed 132 to 35. Tai just hasn't, you know, looked too good. Look at that headshots, 99 to 4.
Shit show.
That's crazy, dude.
That's a shit show.
What do you got?
I mean, that's a shit show. I couldn't help it. I mean, you just read that number out loud. Triple digits versus single digits. What is there to say? There's nothing. I mean, what do
you do with Tuivasa now? You know, I mean, he's lost 3 in a row, I think. But they're to all the top guys, right? They're all top 10 fighters. Whoa. I say you pull him back, or he takes a little bit of time off. You pull him back, but who does he fight though?
Okay, right off the bat, Tai definitely time off, dude. You know, I hope he makes shit to the money. That's three KOs in a row. I know us Polynesians are tough. I know they got great chins and all that, but 3 in a row, like, dude, you gotta chill.
This was a submission, but he still, I mean, he ate enough shots on the ground. It's basically,
it was just he's been getting deactivated basically by shots, and you know, I just don't want to see a fighter. What are we gonna do? Put him against another hard fight, get 4 in a row? That's basically if you take about a hard fight. So Tai, number one answer, time off, chill. But I gotta take a step into the fight. Just for a second, I'm paraphrasing from my co-host during the watch long party. Den, you know, he fought professionally, so he has Muay Thai background and stuff. And he was questioning, and he was bringing a good point, which was weird. Tai was just opening up with a naked low leg kick and just eating right crosses and straight rights, like just dangerous shots, really, basically. And if Tai wasn't Mr. Tuivasa, that dude would have been knocked out or flat on his face way earlier.
Yeah.
Like he was eating devastating, basic elementary counters, and the game plan that Ty was applying was just god awful wrong. So whether Mr. Tuivasa couldn't adjust mid-flight or whatever the heck was going on, just things are just not right. And I, please chill out. I want to see you knock out more fools in the future. But yeah, that's kind of all of my thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to I'm not gonna say similar, but it's kind of played out like the main event a little bit, where it's like the basics won the fight, basically, right? The basics won the fight.
Straight up.
I think you got to give him Parker Porter. Pat, what do you think? You got to give him Parker Porter in Australia.
I don't know. I don't know. You got to go that far. I mean, yeah, his game plan here was definitely like chew the leg, right? I mean, you even heard it in the corner at the end of round one. Like the leg is like they were saying, like the leg is effed, like chew. So it basically was like Ty was like, all right, I'm just gonna chew the leg and eat shots because I'm Ty, and Volkov can knock you down, but he doesn't have like crazy power. Just like touches you and you're out, right? He's precision. He's much more precision shot knockdowns. And so, I think that game plan did not work. And the height differential and reach, right, that obviously made it tough for him. But still, like, he was just brawling. And you can't do that against a precision guy like Volkov, who his whole thing is to snipe you. So this played out kind of how I thought it would. I thought Volkov would have gotten the actual knockout, right? I thought they were going to stop it when he got in full mount and was just landing shots. I'm surprised they let it go as long as they did. But I think what you do with Ty now is you definitely give him a bounce back fight, right? Similar to what they did with Lewis and what's his name? Guy, it's not even. I don't even think he's with the UFC anymore. He's part of the brothers.
Duckus, Mr. Duckus.
Yeah, Duckus. Yeah, Duckus. Right, like you give him somebody that like is a little bit recognizable, but is definitely either outside the 15 or right on the 15 where you can get it done. Like I like Rodrigo Nascimento. That's more of a challenge for him. You could go Tybura if you wanted to give him like a little bit more step in competition, but somebody that he could, end up beating. I mean, because he's not. Ty has proven, right, like he can compete and hang with the top 15, top 10 guys. It's just now heavyweight has finally caught up where they have enough young and good fighters that he's falling down the ranks. That brawling of I'm just gonna like go in there and just throw doesn't work as much. So yeah, I like somebody like Nascimento or you give him an Arlovsky. That's a classic one, right? Like give him.
He fought Arlovsky already.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
The thing about Ty is he's still super young, right? He's only 30. Yeah. But he got into the UFC so young as well. What's up, Jay?
Can we borrow Carlos Oberg's call out? Let's give Ty Dominic Reyes.
At heavyweight? Is Dominic Reyes at heavyweight?
No. Yeah, Reyes
is
light
never
heavyweight.
Mind.
Yeah.
Mixed it up. My bad.
But the thing about Ty is like he's really a guy that will fight anybody because he fought Pavlovich when nobody wanted to fight Pavlovich. I think like they gave him Pavlovich because like everybody turned him down, and Ty was like, "I bang, let's go."
Yeah, Martin Boudet would be a good one, right? Isn't he?
He's like undefeated in the UFC right now.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good one. Like a name that's up and coming, but like the Ty has a solid shot to bounce back from. Like that's a. Yeah, I like that fight. But somebody like that, right? Like it's because I mean he should take time off. I would take at least a year off or 9 months bare minimum, because you don't want to keep eating big shots, and it's heavyweight, right? Like it's always big shots.
And John knows,
and he's 30 years old. Like he has time, right?
Yeah.
Like all the other heavyweights are like 35. Which are the top heavyweights right now are like 35 years old. That gives him so much time to hit his prime, basically. Like it's kind of insane. Like, will we ever see Tai Tuivasa hit his prime?
Well, that's the criticism that's the criticism fans were saying while we were watching it live, John. Fans were just saying, "Hey, I wonder what Ty would be like in shape." maybe this is the time. Maybe let his brain recover and let him get into like peak physical condition while he's still only 30.
But a
Could be
lot of
dangerous.
Samoans, that's in shape to them. I'm gonna tell you that right now.
Brother,
You
know,
I
you've
know.
been around
them.
I grew up with them. I know. I know.
You know.
That's
You know,
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
mean-
Samoans, that's in shape.
I know
That's in shape. Like,
I know that's how they think.
Yeah.
That's why it took not until BJ Penn was at the end of his career for him to see a nutritionist. You didn't see him have abs for 15 of his 20 years of fighting. So,
But he did terrible at the end of his career.
I'm not comparing I'm not comparing his success.
I know.
Physique, but
remember the tiptoe BJ Penn against Frankie Edgar? That was the worst BJ Penn, dude. The tiptoe BJ Penn.
No,
he came
dude,
in all on his tiptoes.
No, worst BJ Penn was when he did.
Polynesians have a superstition that we're not good fighters with abs. I don't know where that superstition came from, but I'm just kidding.
It could be true.
No,
it could be true, but
I don't know what it is. But yeah, Ty, I think that would be great. Like, let's be honest. Like, he's young. He can change his body type if he wants to. If he doesn't subscribe to the Samoan mystic arts, that is perfect fighting physique, and we could see a totally new Tuivasa very soon.
But Tuivasa is like he's like the type of fighter that that I'm a fan of. Like, really, like, those are the type of fighters. Those are the fighters, right? The guys that don't turn down fights. You know what I mean? It's probably not the best thing for their career, right? Because they do need to have some kind of like management guiding them through like certain matchups, right? Because this is a sport. This is a game. But the guys that are out there, there's just like, put the name on the contract and I'll fight them at the highest level. It's like, yo, that's another level of respect that I have for certain fighters. That's why Ty will always be on the list of fighters. He could lose 20 in a row, dude. I'll just be like, yeah, I'll still watch him fight. It's like Dan Hooker. He's another guy that is just like top. He's top in the world, but he'll fight anybody. And that's why he just got management to guide him through certain matchups, right? Like, don't take every fight that they offer you, right? So that's what I'm just saying.
He's Mark Hunt's protege, man. Like, I don't think he's ever getting in shape. I don't think he's ever turned it down a fight. I think he's living that Mark Hunt life, and I love it.
Dude,
so I mean,
Mark Hunt has so many proteges.
I have no complaints.
Right? He has the Taffa brothers, who are his proteges as well, who are same. No. They're just out there knocking heads off.
Yeah, no, dude, Mark Hunt. I always have to give a shout out when we mention Mark Hunt, because he by far is the most successful non-champion to ever dude, that dude.
Was it,
well, no,
$900,000 a fight. Was it
getting like 800K a fight? 800K a fight, and he was 15-15 when he retired. Yeah. Like that dude lost to Justin Willis right in his last fight when he was just over the hill. It was done and it was bad, and he got 800K to lose to Justin Willis. Yeah, man.
That was the Zuffa era right there, boy.
Era. Well, I mean, that's where I don't know how many times I have to tell fighters, right, when they're like, oh, they don't have enough money to pay out. I'm like, dude, you know Arlovsky is making $400K a fight right now? Like, Arlovsky makes more than the bantamweight and flyweight champions right now for fighting like Chase Sherman. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, and his clothing, because he's fought so many fights, his Venom clothing deal is like he gets a shit ton of money because of that.
Yeah, he gets like 50 grand. No, I mean, again, shout out to Arlovsky too. It's just like, I'm just gonna keep fighting forever and making ungodly amounts of money fighting unranked heavyweights.
You know what's completely bullshit is that I'm not saying it's bullshit that Arlovsky is getting paid that much, because I think he should. I think it's bullshit that someone like the Korean Zombie, who had 10 straight main events in the UFC, wasn't even getting paid half of what Arlovsky was getting paid.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's my main thing is like it's anytime somebody tries to push back and be like, oh, like fighter pay, blah blah blah. I'm like, look at what they paid AllStar Overeem. Look at what they paid Mark Hunt. Look at what they paid Andrei Arlovsky. And it wasn't like they absorbed those Pride contracts and then they tried to cut them, because they could have cut both Arlovsky or Reem or Hunt easily. Like there are some clauses that may have protected them a little bit, but like they could have done that and they kept him around. So that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I mean, I love Ty. I hope he takes some time off. I hope
yeah, man. He's actually a good representative of the sport, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? He doesn't try to be something he's not. He just kind of plays up to the crowd, and and it seems like everybody embraces him. Like I've been around Ty quite a bit, and like he's kind of like just a regular dude. But when the lights and camera comes on, like he turns it up a little bit, and he has an image. I mean, he's always going to be liked. I think. I don't think he's going to do anything like people that are going to be like, oh, they hate him. No, he's always going to have a good position. Anyways, let's move on to the next fight. But before we get there, like I always do, go to the descriptions, download the AllStar app. If you guys watch baseball, and I know Pat, he loves the Phillies. He's always tweeting about them, and I have no idea what he's talking about because I don't know who the players are. I know baseball, but I just don't know who the players are, right? But yeah, so you watch baseball, football, college, pro, whatever, you download the app, you could customize it, you get everything for you customized. Like if you just want Philly news, just Philly news. If you want MLB news, just MLB news on top of Philly news, right? Like you just customize it. If you want the fighting only, which I have, well, fighting in NFL because I kind of follow it a little bit. But yeah, that's how I customize mine. And how'd you customize yours, J-Spec? What sports you have?
Oh man, me and you copying each other. I run with the NFL.
Don't lie. And you don't have it customized. You just copy what I said. I'm just kidding.
It's there.
But yeah, he's wearing the San Francisco. You're a Frisco fan?
Yeah, baby, my whole life. Okay. Red and gold till I'm dead and cold. What's up?
There you go. Yes, I was a Frisco fan as well because they played the Cowboys, and my brother was a Cowboys fan, so I had to hang on it.
Natural right.
Back in the day. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Oh, this one is getting a lot of talk for the wrong reasons, right? Manel Kape. I think Manel Kape is a future champion. Let's just say I'm just gonna put that out there. I think he has the skills to be a future champion. It's just like, will he get the fights to get there? That's the question. Will he get the fights to get there? Because this fight definitely showed not how good Kape is, but how good Dos Santos is. Like Dos Santos clearly showed a couple of weaknesses in the game of Kape. Pat, did you see that?
Yeah, I think he did. It was a fun fight, right? Like, I mean, they stand and threw, but I mean, definitely showed a couple of weaknesses in Kape. I mean, he got hit a lot, right? And we'd seen a little bit of this in the Alex Perez loss and but in those fights, the interesting thing I found was Kape, in the two fights he lost, Kape didn't throw much volume, right? Like he threw, I think maybe like 50 or 60 strikes the entire time. Like a big thing was his hesitancy to throw. In this fight, he threw like double what he's ever thrown or near double whatever he's ever thrown in the UFC. And he was still getting hit quite a bit. Like he was coming in at weird angles. He was just kind of throwing it. I think that if you look at this performance, it was super fun, and Dos Santos is not to be messed with. I think Dos Santos does have a future in bantamweight, right? Like he was supposed to be on Contender Series. I think he would have blown past his opponent, and he would, if you like kind of eased him in, I think he'd be good. But I think it did kind of show that Kape needs to work a little bit more on his defense, and he needs to know when to pull the trigger, because he was biting feints. He was still having issues where Santos was just like throwing little things at him, and then Kape would like shell up or wouldn't quite throw because he was worried about getting hit by something. And so I think this was not the best performance for Kape, despite the knockdown, despite winning clearly. And that can happen, right? Everybody's had those fights before. Driscus, who we talked about earlier, I forget who it was against, Trevor Jones or whatever. He looked terrible until he got the knockout. Like that happens. I don't know if that's that this is that fight for Kape, but either way, not his best performance.
Yeah, well, not his best performance, but he still gets to win, which is the best case scenario, right, for these guys, especially a guy that's like at the top of the division, and you just take a short notice fight against a unbeaten prospect you have no idea about. But at least he traveled the same distance. You know what I mean? I heard that he was already in Vegas, so in Kape he trains out of Vegas. So like he goes in there. Kape, he's a guy that I followed for so long because I've known Kape since like back in Ryzen days before he was a Ryzen champion. Like I've interviewed him back then, met him in Phuket when he was training at AKA Thailand. He's always been this way. Some people like just started to find out about Cop, like, oh, this guy, he's on the mic just going crazy. He's always been this way. Like this is not anything new.
God.
He's just it's just a bigger platform for him.
I'm getting flashbacks from the Ryzen tournaments, man. He
went crazy. Like especially in a country where it's like a lot of respect stuff, you know what I mean? Like that's something that's important. Like he went there and he respect, but then he would go in on his opponents. He's doing the same exact thing now. It's just a bigger platform. It's nothing new. So don't get mad at him about it. Well, you can if you want to. But yeah, like Dos Santos, man, those guys at Shoot Box, the Diego Lima, the head coach, he's creating an army of kamikazes, dude. Like these guys are fearless, got sick chins, crazy striking, and the pressure is insane, right? Is it great for your longevity? Probably not. But is it a good strategy against like a lot of these guys that are fighting? It is. It is a good strategy because a lot of these guys are not used to being pressured that much. Look at the stats, man. One thing about Cop is he's very accurate, right? 115 strikes landed out of 200 thrown, right? But look at Dos Santos. He threw 308 strikes and he landed more though, right? But the impact, that's what we got to look at, right? Headshots, Cobb landed a little bit more. Body shots, Dos Santos. Legs, Dos Santos. But man, this fight was a lot closer than I think a lot. I think the knockdowns is what kind of sealed it for Cobb in this fight. He had a few, didn't he? He didn't just have one, did he?
There's one that didn't score officially as a knockdown, but yeah, he should have like.
Yeah, it should have been, but yeah, he should have at least 2. I think maybe even 3. But like, yeah I mean, they only gave him 1, which is whatever. But yeah, he definitely. In the judge's eyes, it would have been the same, right? Like if I'm judging a fight and I see what happened, I would have counted multiple knockdowns for sure. So
all right, so with Cop, it's clear as day, man. Like you rebooked the Kai Kara France fight. Do that in New Zealand. I think they could do that because I think Cop will play up the bad guy role, and it's best to do it in the country of his opponent. And I saw some picture of was it Dana White and Kai Kara France, and he said Auckland, something about Auckland. So maybe we'll see that in Auckland. That would be awesome to see. Cop go into enemy territory, maybe a main event fight night or something, 5 rounds against Kai Kara France. I think that's a perfect case scenario. If Cop wins, he gets a title shot because Kai Kara France is, he's one of the guys at the top of the division, fought for the title already. J-Spec, what do you think? What do you think we should do with Cop?
Cop is exactly what you said, dude. There's nothing else that should be done. I'm jumping behind my buddy John here. Exactly what he just said. That's what needs to happen. The fight is interesting. It's meaningful. It's like what should be done. We got a location. We got like everybody involved. Everything's set up. Like the fans are ready. I'm ready to show up. Like when's it happen? Just give me the date. Because there's really nothing else for him. He already did a solid, right? He took a short notice opponent. He took a guy that was clearly more dangerous than anybody saw coming. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So he did a solid for the company. He had a lot to lose here. He fought a game bird, gave us a great fight, got the performance of a night bonus. So like from that perspective, like you nailed it, Mr. Cop. Like you did everything you should do and can do as a fighter. So with that being said, the very next thing is just do what was supposed to be done, get you in that fight that could, bring you into that conversation of championship conversations and whatnot. So yeah, John, I for lack of originality, buddy, I got to copy and paste on that one. I'm gonna go to Mr. Dos Santos though. Like, bro, nominate him for debutant of the year. Like, of course he didn't get the dub, but holy shit. Yeah, we could critique Manel Cop's technique or whatever, but he went in there and he had a guy in his face, like you said, like vintage shoot the box style, just in your shit, bringing it to you. And maybe like we talked about Adesanya earlier, like once you get popped in the face and you got a game bird in front of you, somebody who wants to fight you, they're not here to compete in MMA against you. They're here to fight you. They want to beat you up. and that's what he was facing. So he had to make those adjustments. He found a way to do it, but hell yeah, Dos Santos. I mean, I am already a fan. We talked about you brought up longevity. Obviously, I want longevity for all fighters, but if you can come in on the scene, okay, so you're not undefeated anymore, but you trade that one loss for like instant recognition. Everybody in our watch party was a Dos Santos fan. Everybody wants to see him fight again. So it's like maybe not longevity, but shit, you're shooting straight onto people's radar. So there you go. Those are all my thoughts about that fight.
With Cobb, right? I think that he'll grow from this experience. Maybe Cobb underestimated Dos Santos, and I think Cobb might have underestimated his opponents when he first entered the UFC. To be honest with you, and he wasn't just performing at the highest level. And maybe this was the same case because Cobb, he's very confident. If you've seen him, if you heard him speak, you know that he is. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Dos Santos. You never know. Dos Santos might have this performance, and we're talking so highly of him, and then his next performance is against another prospect, and he loses to him, and then next you know we don't never see him again. Who knows, right? But Kopp, that's not the case. We know he's one of the best in the world, and hopefully he does get set up against Kai Kara France. Do you like that idea, Pat?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have too many more points to add because you both killed it. So, but yeah, I like that fight. I know there's a rumor, and it was asked at the press conference, and Dana kind of dodged it, but they talked about a UFC Auckland card, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think it makes sense. That's your headliner right there. It's Kai Kara versus Cobb. I think that's probably the biggest city kickboxing fight you could make right now, given that 6 of their guys just fought. So I think that's what you do. And yeah, I love that fight. I don't know how you match them up against anyone else unless somebody gets real injured or something happens. Cause that's definitely the fight.
Yeah. I think it'd probably be like, it'll be Dan Hooker and Kai Kara France, and one of them will headline, right? And one of them will co-headline. I think that's the double whammy, because Adesanya will never fight in New Zealand again. So, and Dan and Kai, they'll both fight in New Zealand. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Everybody that's watching, please leave a comment on who you thought was the best performer of the night, because there was a lot of finishes. Let me put some of the fight on the card. Right now, I put the app, the AllStar app. You guys could get that app in the descriptions. Download it. You can make picks on UFC fights. So I want to get into the next 3 fights, right, in a row. If you look on the screen, you got Tafa, Justin Tafa getting the first round KO. Whenever I pick Justin Tafa, I always put first round KO because that's what usually happens either way. So that's the pick, and I got it all right. And then you got Tyson Pedro with the first round knockout against the Pleasure Man, and then you got Carlos Olberg's third round submission win over Taon Jung. Of course, I couldn't pick against the Korean. I just can't do that, right? So out of these 3, Justin Tafa, Tyson Pedro, and Carlos Olberg, who do you feel, Pat, has the brightest future between these 3?
I think it's Olberg, and I think it's Olberg by a mile. You know, he has looked really, really good in a lot of his fights. Obviously, he had the Kennedy Njoku fight where he got knocked out after just lighting Kennedy up for so long. And I think since then, he's been a little bit more conservative. You've noticed it in his last 2 fights. I was surprised he didn't throw more strikes here. He eventually started to, right? Like once he started to get comortable. But Ung is not, a slouch. Ung is definitely, 15-4 or Jung. Sorry, Jung Jung is definitely not a slouch, right? Like he's 15-4 now after the loss, but he's 15-3. He had some notable wins, and some. A weird fight against Sam Alvey, but if you take out the fight with Sam Alvey, like, I mean, he's a good up and coming prospect. And so, like, it's one of those things where Olberg showed the tools that can take him farther, right? He still has ways to go. He's got to step up in competition, do all that. But yes, when it comes to Tafa and Pedro, Tafa is as you said, right? Like I'm going to throw, I'm Mark Hunt style, Tai Tuivasa style. I'm going to throw it. I'm going to knock guys out, or I'm going to get knocked out. But, that style I don't think shows longevity. I think that's got a ceiling to it, especially with how good heavyweight's gotten. And then Pedro, I mean, has looked good against kind of subpar competition, I would say, right? Like Anton is okay, but I mean, his last couple wins, Ike Villanueva, Henry Hunsucker, right? Like,
Sucker.
yeah, like those are like pretty, you know, entry level guys. And then you look at the guys he's lost to recently. The fact he lost to a very old Shogun who St. Preux. I mean, Modestos. That by far was like kind of the test of like, okay, are you ready to kind of get back up and step into this? And he lost what I thought was a pretty clear decision. And it's like, I think his ceilings, we kind of know what his ceiling is. He'll be a fun unranked gatekeeper that has a name, but I just don't see him going as far. Olberg, I think, you know, still got that chance to climb the ladder, and I think he's well on his way. I'm hoping we get a real step up in competition. He's exciting to watch, right? Like he's always finishing the fights, except against, you know, Fabio Sherratt, which is the weirdest person to decision. But any other fight, it's a KO submission or something else. So out of all the people in the decision on that list, would not have guessed Fabio Sherratt was the one who decision.
Olberg, he's sitting at 32 years old. Pedro is actually younger than Olberg at 31. Down Jung is 29 years old. These guys are all around their prime, right? And you know, some of them, you never know what's going to materialize in the next 3 years, right? Like this is the chunk of time where you really have to watch these fighters, right? Jung is a little bit younger than these guys, and I think that he has a lot of holes, right? Because if you look at Jung and in his last 3 fights, right, he just lost a striking battle to Olberg basically, and he just got kind of beat down and then submitted at the end. And then he lost a grappling battle with Devin Clark. These are kind of like 2 specialists, right? Devin Clark's more of a grappler specialist, lost to him. Olberg's more of a striker, lost to him with strike, but he lost by submission and whatnot. Jacoby, he was just knocked out by a striker, and that was like the highest level striker he's faced, I think, in his career so far. It was knocked out. He needs to take a step back. He needs to find a secondary gym, I think, a gym that has a lot of light heavyweights, and middleweights. Because I think the gym that he's training at right now, great coaching in Korea, but Asians, man, they're not that big. And to kind of narrow it down to find training partners for Jung, it's going to be hard, right? Because he's not normal. How many Asians are in like the light heavyweight, and even middleweight divisions? You could probably count them on your hand how many there are total.
It's few and far between.
Exactly, right? So it just shows you that, you know, a light heavyweight or middleweight is like finding a heavyweight in the world, in Asia, right? So I think he has room for improvement. But Olberg, yes, I agree with you. He is very good, man. He has shown that he's very good. A lot of people are clouded by his looks and the Bachelor and all of this stuff outside the cage, but this dude has proven that he's a dude that is a solid up and comer. And I think it was smart for him to call out Dominic Reyes. What do you think, J-Spec? Man,
so here we go. Of the 3 gentlemen who won, I want to evaluate them. The losers get no evaluation. No, I'm just kidding. So first off, Tyson Pedro. You guys called it. No disrespect. I kind of feel Pat. I think we know who he is. I think he'll be fun for some fights. Very, you know, win some fights, but not expecting world championship status, you know. Now, you guys are I also agree that you guys are also right. As far as Carlos Olberg is clearly the most developing fighter, most evolving. As he's come out in different fights, you can see his skills getting better and better. I kind of was criticizing him, seeing how his grappling was going to go. I know it was a very small sample size against Mr. Jung, but he looked pretty good for the moments that he had to do it. So as far as going up the hill, so to speak, Mr. Mr. Olberg is the guy who's evolving, looking good, doing so. But here's where it gets crazy. I just used looking good, and this is where I think things get weird. You said who's going to have the most pop or the biggest flair. I forget the exact question John used, but I think the public, I think MMA fans, and most specifically the male MMA fans, I'm calling y'all out because I'm all listening to watch parties. I'm hearing y'all, y'all insecure over Carlos Ulberg. There's tweets, there's memes, there's stuff out there that's like, what do you do when your girl asks who's that fighting, and it's Carlos Ulberg, and you're supposed to block the camera, right? That let her see. I mean, hey, there's all funs and jokes, whatever's. But I really think that a handsome fighter, so to speak, can have some parasitic drag on your name, that guys are more reluctant to talk or be your fan over a handsome guy. I want to be a fan of a handsome guy. I think it's easier to be a fan of a Justin Taffa, a guy with a killer fucking porn stash who knocks brothers out and does solo dances at the end. That's a guy who's easy to be a fan of, and you don't have to worry about, if you're thinking of those other stuff, you don't got to worry about it. Plus, an X factor. There's double Taffas in the heavyweight division. And I know everybody should know they're two different people and they're brothers. But psychologically, if fans are regularly seeing the Taffa last name on a card with knockout attached to that name, I think it's possible that Justin Taffa, out of these three that we mentioned, could have the biggest pop, biggest fanfare overall when things are said and done. But I expect athletically Mr. Ulberg to probably reach the highest of the rankings. And that's my thoughts on those three guys.
Yeah, well, when you look at like athletically gifted, you could tell Ulberg is probably the most out of the three.
Genetic lottery. That guy's a genetic lottery. Come on.
He's a freak. He's a genetic freak, right? Like, look at him. And
I mean, he's a Luke Rockhold. He's a Alan Joe Bass.
Exactly.
Right?
Without the shitty, bitchy attitude.
That we know of. That we know.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of things out there that you don't know about, fighters and whoever, right?
With the
they have certain images. They have certain images, but that image is not reality, right? So we got to keep that in mind. But strictly fighting wise, man, you got to kind of lean towards Ulberg, right? You got to lean towards it, just from recent history and the level of competition and how he's like kind of like fought to the level, like he's fought to that level, right, and beyond it by beating these guys. So Ulberg, there you go, man.
Last part of your question was the call out to Reyes. Smooth move. Actually, I thought it was a great usage of his time on the map. Also a good person he could beat, recognizable name, all this kind of stuff you're talking about. Well done.
Yeah, you have to. Like, if you're an up and comer, you want to attack the wounded prey that's above you. That's the way that you should plan it out, right? Not like, oh yeah, of course you want to fight the best guys, but you are going to fight the best guys in championship fights. So to get to that point, you want to fight the favorable matchups if you can, right? So we'll see. We never know. They might get matched up and Reyes comes out, super yoked and vintage Reyes and just blows Ulberg's head off. Who knows? Right? But we don't know. We don't even know if they're going to put that fight together. I doubt that it'll happen, to be honest with you. I doubt it.
Fair.
Now, moving on to the prelims, right? So we had a couple prelims. Let's see. We had Jenkins against Chepe. We had Malarkey, McDessie, Hawk Parast versus Quinones. Blood Diamond versus Radke. Young Miranda and Crosby Giuseppe. So any of those fights, what was the best fight for you out of those, of the night, Pat?
For me, I think it was Hakaras versus Quinones, right? Like, I mean, that fight was, a lot of people expected Quinones it's another Contender Series guy that got called up to, because of people dropping out. Hakaras is definitely a dangerous guy. Like he's had some misfires, but he's solid and he's a dangerous guy, especially right on the edge of the bubble of rankings. And this fight like delivered. I mean, they threw down, right? Like they went on a crazy pace. Quinones was tired like midway through round 2, but found a way to just keep throwing. This is one of those fight of the night type fights for me. Like there were a couple on this card. This was one of them. This was just banger. So I think this was a great showing. I think both men's stock rise after this one, just because again, despite Quinones not making it past the first round of the Ultimate Fighter, they say quarterfinalists. There's only quarterfinals, so he didn't make it out of there. But I think he demonstrated that he can be action, he can throw, and that's something you want to do if you're trying to get into the UFC and you're going to take that first loss, right? You want to demonstrate you can throw down and fight. They're more likely to give you more opportunities. So maybe he pans out, maybe he doesn't, but I'm excited to see his next fight. Nasrat, again, always solid. And then, a couple of the other fights were all right, but they were semi-expected, I guess. It was one of those things. Obviously, the Jack Jenkins one was not, because that was just a weird injury, which,
gross.
Sucks. Like I hate when fights end that way, because it's a no-win for anybody.
Right.
But it was an interesting fight up until then. I thought it was much closer. I'd say round one of that fight was solid, right? Much closer than I think people thought it would be. But yeah, for me, it's Nasrat versus Quinones for sure, or the lightweight Gastelum, as he's called, right? Like that's that's the fight for me on that one. Blood Diamond. I will say this: Blood Diamond versus Radic should have never been on the card. Blood Diamond was a favor. That's that. Hey, City Kickboxing, we're gonna throw you a favor, a la Nate Diaz. Nick Diaz. I forget the name of his boy, Nick Diaz. When he came back, one of his
Max something, right?
Well, no, there was Max, who was like his protege, but then there was a guy that came on that had fought in Bellator once, was like a 2-1 fighter or something.
I know I
and
remember.
like got destroyed.
There was two of them.
There were a couple, and it's just like, it's clearly just like doing a favor for somebody that you want on the card. I think this was a City Kickboxing favor, because Blood Diamond trains out of there, right? It's like, this is not a UFC level caliber guy. He's now 3-3. He needs more experience before he even gets to that level. So, that's my thoughts on the prelims, I'd say.
Well, I'm happy to see Kevin Jousset finally get his UFC chance. He's been kind of, working his way up through the Australian, New Zealand scene, became champion in some of the promotions out here. And he goes in there, gets the first round submission. So he looked pretty good. It looks like he's going to be moving forward. Shane Young, man, I think that's 4 in a row for him, which is not good. Most likely he's not going to be. And Miranda, man, he melted through him pretty easily, right? Miranda, I picked him actually. Blood Diamond, he's probably not going to be fighting for the UFC anymore. But he could work himself back. You never know. He's still young. He doesn't have that many MMA fights, to be honest. So he could go back to the regional scene, fight a couple, and then take advantage of it. You know what I mean? Like, it's never at the end of the world. You got to look at it realistically. But other than that, this fight was probably the fight of the night. That and Cop versus Dos Santos, right? Those two went at it. That was fun. Malarkey, McDessie wasn't a bad fight. I think Malarkey did a good job of kind of preparing for McDessie's style. And McDessie, he's 38 years old. He's good enough, but man, I think he's reached a point where it's like, you're not beating the middle of the division, which is not a good sign, right?
Well, he's fighting once a year, I mean,
and
he's 38.
And in fairness, he did pretty good for a guy. I thought he was going to get smoked for a guy.
Some people thought he won. Yeah.
A lot of people, if you look at MMA decisions, I thought he won personally. And then if you look at MMA decisions, I think only two people gave him Malarkey. Like the rest all gave McDessie. I'm leading that he kind of, I don't know that it's like a robbery. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but like I thought he won the fight. I think there's a fair amount of people who did.
It was close. Yeah, it was a very close fight.
Yeah, but
if you look at the statistics, you like total strikes edges for Malarkey, but just barely, and then the head strikes is more on McDessie's side, but body and the kicks is all Malarkey. If you look at the statistics, right?
I want to use this moment to just throw admonishment just for a quick moment, John, because bro, you interview a lot of fighters, and we hear these guys talk to us and talk to me too, and they're always trying to get some attention and stuff. And I'm just gonna say this: Mike Mathea, formerly Blood Diamond. I'm only gonna call you your legal name from now on, dude. People try real hard and work a lot to get obviously into the UFC, and you have too. And I'm not saying that, but dude, you have a nickname. People recognize you. Blood Diamond is the most recognizable loser in the UFC. And he went out there and performed in such a half-ass, piss-poor manner that I'm actually hoping he gets cut, because I just don't like when certain fighters get these pushes, get these favors, get the nickname, get all the stuff, and they go in and they fight in a way like they didn't even want to be in the first place.
Damn, why you gotta be so harsh on him, man?
It happened.
Why you gotta
Sorry.
do that? Why you gotta be like that? Blood Diamond is a nice guy, man. Like, he's never been out there like talking crazy. You know what I mean? Like, but I understand where you're coming from, though, J-Spec. Let's say Blood Diamond fought these fights on the regional scene and got a couple more wins, and then entered the UFC. We would be seeing a different type of fighter, to be honest with you. I think he just, the experience level, man, it's just different. And Raki, Raki he didn't have the best performance either, right? Like, come on, it was not a fight that you'd show like a person that is not even a fan of the sport, and you just show them this fight, you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm not watching that. Anyways, all the best to Blood Diamond and Shane Young, and hopefully, if they do get cut, they make it onto the make it back somehow, fight on the regional scene, something. All right. One last thing before we take off that I want to talk about, because of course my man Pat is on the show, is the sale of Bellator, because it seems like it's getting closer and closer and closer. And I would like to get J-Spec's thoughts on it as well, from his perspective as a guy that watches the sport, because everybody is looking at it through a different lens. So the newest revelation is that, Errol Hawani has reported that the sale of Bellator is imminent, and it looks like PFL is going to end up buying Bellator. And we saw recently that PFL just got a huge investment, right, of $100 million from the Saudi Arabia. I forgot what country it is. Saudi Arabia, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So tell us what that means. First, the $100 million investment, or whatever amount investment, and then, is the sale imminent? Let's go into that. We'll let you speak a little bit, and then we can feed off what you say.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in terms of, right, like there's been a lot of rumors around the sale. There's been different reporting. Now it seems that it's imminent, right? The Kawani's usually on top of that. It's when will they announce it? What's the deal there? But the Saudi investment, basically, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are fighting each other to become the next economic hub, and trying to make their respective countries the economic hub in the Middle East, right? Like, that's part of the Qatar World Cup. That's part of Saudi Arabia giving money to WWE and Live Golf, right? And Saudi Arabia has bought a bunch of soccer teams, where they've bought well-known soccer teams and taken a lot of prospect players and moved them there. Obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo is the huge signing. That was like $800 million or something crazy to go play in Saudi Arabia. Dude. Some unreal amount of money. But so they have these funds that are basically money that's earmarked specifically for investing or helping to grow sports. And so it comes from a $650 billion or $1 million fund, some ungodly amount of money fund. Then they have this fund, the SRJ, which is called Surge. That's how you're supposed to pronounce it. And through that fund, it was announced not that long ago, like a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, whenever they made the announcement that PFL was getting the money, because PFL was their first investment in $100 million. And what that's signaling is they're trying to get into the MMA game similarly to how they did with Live Golf, how they have with soccer, right? This is an opportunity they see of, okay, if we throw enough money here, right? They now have Francis Ngannou. They're talking about bringing other fighters on. Jake Paul is under the banner, Clarissa Shields, right? Like, this is enough money we're going to try and throw at this to, bring events to Saudi Arabia, help sports wash, right? If that's what you want to call it from a political standpoint of the human rights violation stuff. This is a way to kind of help their image. It's good PR for them. This is what they're trying to do. And they've been trying to do it for a while in different sports. MMA is just its most recent target. In terms of the deal with Bellator, the interesting thing to me is going to be PFL has basically staked their entire company off of being a different business model where it's a tournament. It's all meritocratic, right? Based on the season and playoff rules. I mean, I say that, right? Natan Levy is, or at home, or not Natan Levy. Natan Schultz is at home, cursing right now, rightfully so. But I mean, that's their gimmick, is like their differentiation, right? If you're talking about strategic, competitive strategy, their differentiation is their model that they're using, tournament only format and all this. If you buy Bellator, you get a bunch of name fighters outside of the UFC, which is great, but you're going to have a much more bloated roster now, right? And the question is, Bellator has done a lot of tournaments too. Like, how do you get that together? They've already kind of hinted at what they're doing with the Saudi money, where they're starting a MENA region PFL league, similar to what they've done with PFL Europe, and they want to do a world tournament, which I think is an interesting idea. It's a good gimmick where, okay, you're going to have everybody fight through their own like countries or global positioning tournament, and then have everybody come together for a world championship tournament. Great, makes sense. I don't know if you add Bellator fighters into those different tournaments. I don't know if you have Bellator be its own separate tournament, and then the winner of that gets to be thrown in the World Championships too. I'm just not sure how they're going to integrate Bellator into the PFL model, because whenever you have a merger and acquisition, right, like, it's a complicated process. You're going to have duplicate jobs. People are going to lose their jobs, front office people. Fighters are going to get cut because they're just going to have to get cut. And once you eliminate those redundancies, you have this brand new company and you kind of see where it goes. I have no idea how PFL plans to use Bellator outside of taking their biggest name fighters and inserting them into the tournaments. Like, that makes plenty of sense. But it's an interesting call, because by absorbing Bellator, right, they become the de facto number 2 promotion. And Don Davis has said, like, they're trying to actually become a co-leader in this. I don't know that it actually helps in that regard. It's step 1 in getting more, like, every fighter not under UFC contract that's a bigger name outside of the one championship guys now. Everybody's under one umbrella. That's great, but there's still so many other hurdles and things in the way. It doesn't just equate, like, stock dropped. Endeavor and WWE stock plummeted after this happened because everybody's like, oh, it's Live Golf. It's not Live Golf. Until the antitrust lawsuit is done and some major changes are made to UFC contracts, I don't think this does much at all, because you can't go get an Israel Adesanya. You can't go get a Conor McGregor, even if you want to, because they're under 8-fight, 9-fight deals, right? Like, it's not a coincidence that all of the champions before their most recent title defenses, you hear Jorge Masvidal signed a 7-fight deal with the UFC. McGregor, when he came back, 8-fight deal with the UFC. There's a reason they've done that. They've locked those guys down. Until that changes, UFC's brand power is too strong. I don't think PFL Bellator is able to challenge it, but it is the biggest threat to the UFC. I will say this, since Pride and Strikeforce. Pride was a bigger threat than at the time, but since Strikeforce,
that's where they bought him. That's where they bought him. That's why they bought him, because at that time, during that era, you could do that. The UFC could go over there and buy them. Now it'd be much harder, right? With all the attention that they have, with all the lawsuits and everything that's going on right now, it's much, much harder for them. But focusing on, like, Bellator and PFL, J-Spec, as a spectator, you've been watching PFL more than probably all 3 of us, or at least 2 of us right here that are on the show. Like, what would the impact be if Bellator roster was infused into the PFL and they just ran the same thing next year with the PFL roster.
Well-
With the PFL Bellator roster infused.
Gotcha. So, going back to the start of this, the initial reaction from fans, because I've brought up this conversation quite a bit, because I was actually looking forward to this. I'll explain that in just a minute, but like, this could be, like Pat just said, the most significant threat, most significant fusion in MMA's history, because we have two legitimate companies that are solid as, and you can get into a debate about it, but everybody ranks PFL 2 or 3 or Bellator 2 or 3. So either way, they're 2 or 3 on everybody's list, and you're fusing 2 and 3 together. I just think that will have a definite spike in interest into the PFL, just because now the names, it's like you said, it's everybody that's recognizable that's not there. The question part is how many people get left over. I first heard about this possible merger thankfully from Chris Brennan, whose son Lucas Brennan fights in Bellator, and he kind of broke it a little early. And he said, well, for my son, I think we're okay because he's undefeated and he's ranked. Probably the top 25% of the roster from Bellator gets absorbed, and everybody else, maybe the top 50%, but the top 25% and everybody else gets cut. The reality is, if you took the top 50% or the top 25% of both rosters and you really did write all the names down, dude, that's a solid list of people.
It is.
It's a super solid list of people, man. So I think you start crossing once you get that together. I know PFL is struggling to get onto the whole pay-per-view model, and that's always where every fighting brand has to be. But with all of that coming together, because that was the other question around PFL that I get asked all the time. How the hell are they going to have pay-per-views, man? They only got Francis. How is that going to work? Well, I think it kind of works now that you got all this other stuff. Last but not least, PFL, like the UFC, probably is looking at, hey, ESPN, how much they want from you guys, how much they want to juice you for all that MMA content. We can make a whole bunch of MMA content. I bet you for a little bit cheaper. And with that being said, now you could have a bigger thing going on where now, I know it's a long answer, but I've talked to a lot of people on how could this work. This could work beautifully. You could have the problem with Bellator, right? And the problem with PFL that people feel is they're just not on enough. The people love the PFL format. They love the season, but when the season dries up or the gaps in between, the weight classes in the regular season format, it kills the draw. People like Bellator, not as much as PFL, I think, but they hate, and even the fighters for them, they hate how few fights they put on. They're on one like once a month. I think you can actually solve all of these problems. Like this merger.
You're saying we want more fights?
Yeah, they want more. Yeah, they want more fights because they don't get to be seen as often. People don't recognize Bellator fighters because they're not on. UFC is on every single week. Even the junk people the junk cards that people complain about, they get to be seen all the time. So now, if you had PFL and Bellator fighters fused together, fighting a little bit more frequently, creating a natural top 8 where that playoff Grand Prix format can really shine, man, you got a lot of elements, dude. And I really, really, really like, and people have really been receptive to the concept of a world championship, having those the Europe, Africa, wherever else they might earmark as whatever. If it's all continents, let's just guess it's all continents. And a real world championship for the first time in MMA, holy shit. But who knows? I don't know if you can buy that with $100 million.
It's a great concept and it's sexy and all, but it will never happen. There's no... You're going to run tournaments in different parts of the world and you expect that to be perfect? Your regular season was filled with grenades and landmines and explosions.
But those are the lower tier guys. Like those regional ones, they only give the winner of that like $100K.
No, I'm saying like running the system. It's not about the money. It's not about. It's about running the system. They can't even run the system properly in America. How can they run the system around the world?
Rob Wilkinson, right? Like popped and got pulled from the tournament. The former
obviously that was ugly. But look, they immediately jumped to the best answer they could find. USADA. I hate USADA, but from a public standpoint, isn't that the best answer you could throw at that problem?
Yes. So here's the one thing I will say, and this is always true in business, especially as someone that does consulting for startups, right? Like, it's the perception, right? Like, we know the reality. We pay attention. John, you and I have watched PFL shows. We know what the ratings are like. We know the God, what was it? PFL season 3 of the playoffs was like 8 hours, and there was just nothing.
Wow.
Like, it was terrible. But when you're going to sell to an investor, aka Surge or anyone else, because right, you've got Kevin Hart, you've got all your friends investing together, blah blah blah. There are a ridiculous amount of investors who know nothing, have a ton of money from whatever reason because they made money either talk about Surge, we're talking about The Rock, who's invested in this, right? Like what have you, and they know nothing about it. They hear a pitch from their friend, like, hey, hear this pitch, and then you have an hour or you bring them to a show and you're like, hey, like here's my chance to sell you on this. And merger and acquisition sounds great. Like, it doesn't matter that like it's going to have all the problems and all this other stuff. If you're going out and you're telling people like, hey, we bought what was the number 2 de facto MMA promotion, like that's how much we're growing. We also got 20 different sponsors, right? Like they listed out Budweiser, Bose, a whole bunch of other things. That helps you go to more vendors and say, like, look, we've got all these guys, we're growing, we're booming, you want to get in on this, and you sell them on the FOMO. The amount of investors and I know who have thrown money at awful ideas just because someone could sell it correctly and had just the right stuff to back it up is insane. I mean, that's like there are so many companies. There's another MMA promotion we both might know where I've seen that happen, and it's ridiculous. But yeah, it's crazy. And so I'm not. The one thing I will say is this will make a big splash, and it will be good for marketing, and it will help a lot. I don't know how it actually works behind the scenes, but J-Spec has a point there. It will look good, and perception is like 90% of this stuff half the time.
Well, with this, of course, you want to see competitors. You do want to see competitors. Merging is a good idea for many different reasons, but being separate is also a good thing for fighters because it gives you more options, and free agency is more prevalent. But if you take away one promotion, free agency, there's less options for the major fighters, right? There's less options for the highest level fighters. But the money thing is so interesting because, like you said, Live Golf and these guys are going in there and buying soccer teams and throwing like 800, 900. That's crazy amounts of money, dude. That's like nearing $1 billion for an athlete, right? And could they do that? Like you said, there's contracts with the UFC and all of that stuff, and there are a lot of fighters are signing 8-fight contracts. But can they go steal these guys away that are not in 8-fight contracts? They're like 2 fights left? They just fight out their contracts because they know that win or lose, live, whatever you want to call it, PFL. They're telling them behind the scenes. I know it's illegal and everything, but behind the scenes, they're telling these guys, "Yo, get out of here, like fight your contract out, and we'll sign you for this amount of money." And it's much more than what you're getting paid by the UFC. Could that be something that is being played?
Absolutely. And I don't have the business smarts that Mr. Pat has, but I'll tell you this: the Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all them, they're putting money in all kinds of sport and sport adjacent stuff. There's all kinds of economic stuff that goes into this answer, but I'm not going to waste my time jabbering about that. The point is, they got shit tons of money. A shit ton of money. Like this is just a little sprinkle they threw on it just to see like if there's any nibbles. If they want to make a move, if they really want to make a move on MMA, they got enough money to buy everybody.
I think it's one of those things where the best example I can come up with for an analogy is what's going on in pro wrestling right now, right? Which is AEW is challenging WWE. And I don't know if you guys follow pro wrestling at all, but like essentially, like in that scenario, you have the owner, a billionaire owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars' son being payrolled to like create a competitor for WWE. And that's a little bit different because the contracts aren't as restrictive and there are like more outs. So you've got stars going back and forth. But I think that is a prime example where the money and what you have in the bank is great, but you got to remember that like the UFC brand image, even if Liv can pull this off or Liv equivalent, really, right? Like you pull off what Liv did with Surge. Like even if PFL can pull this off, it will take a long time to erode that brand power. I mean, you've got 65% of the Contender Series guys being signed, and it's probably going to be higher this season. And they're backfilling people and letting go of more to then go to the PFL or go to Bellator or go wherever to help cut down in costs. And their ticket prices and gates and their viewership is still just incredible. UFC is killing it. And so the contract thing is the biggest issue because the UFC will also, and in their contracts right now, which you'd have to get a judge to strike this down, besides it being just crazy restrictive and all the things they can do to extend it, right? Like take a look at Francis Ngannou. They knew Francis was probably leaving. They tried to schedule something for him when they knew his visa was going to expire and extended it out. Like they've got all those little tricks. But beyond all that, they have a matching rights period. And if the UFC at any point thought like, hey, we are actually like in trouble here in terms of somebody offering a ton of money and taking a star, like Surge isn't just going to throw like Ronaldo money at this because it's not, at that level. But they could match an offer, which would force PFL to invest a ton in one fighter or a couple fighters. And that's something that, I'm not even sure would work. Even Live Golf, right? Like they got a bunch of people to leave the PGA Tour to go over there. And now eventually they're merging. But PGA was still, if you follow golf, PGA was the tour. UFC is still going to be the brand. And they're going to have a bunch of fighters that are going to see some number from the UFC and be like, man, I don't even need any extra money. I'm going to take this amount of money the UFC is giving me, which is more than they would have gotten before. And I'm fighting for the best promotion in the world, the recognizable promotion, the platform. And they're going to lock up the main guys. And it's going to be very hard for Surge and PFL to truly erode at that. It's going to take decades, I think, honestly, unless the antitrust lawsuit changes things. If they limit contracts, all bets are off. But otherwise, I mean, it's the brand power is too strong.
The next few years are going to be very, very interesting, especially pertaining to like contracts and lawsuits and all, like behind the scenes stuff. It's going to be interesting because it will impact the fighters tremendously. Yeah. What results?
Next 6 months are going to be huge if the appeals court does, because they've set a trial date for the lawsuit. They've fast tracked it finally. So if the appeals court doesn't pick up the UFC stuff for whatever reason, that trial starts April, I think 1st or April 2nd. Like that's humongous if they would have to go to trial or settle. I mean, I think the appeals court will pick it up. It'll be a whole thing, but either way, it's going to be the next 12 months are crucial for many pieces. If boxing has had this problem before, and what they did was they canceled basically contract lengths so that anybody could, like, you immediately were free from any contract restrictions. If the UFC got that injunctive relief put on them by the plaintiffs in the antitrust lawsuit, could you imagine if we wake up one day and suddenly all fighters are able to go wherever they want? Yeah. Then you've got chaos for days.
That's called independent contractor.
Yes, that's what it should be. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be crazy. But without the UFC antitrust lawsuit, I guess my point is this goes nowhere fast. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, whatever. You'll get an Ngannou, you'll get one or two big stars. But it's the casual fan who doesn't watch anything except for the occasional big UFC fight because, they've heard of it, whatever, not going to affect them, right? Like, I don't see that being the case.
I got a question. Obviously, we're talking about the implications of the antitrust lawsuit, but what about, I lost track of this story, so I don't know if you guys know, the progress or if there's any on they call it the Muhammad Ali Act Part 2, the extension. Is there Is there any further progress with that? Because that could that possibly shake shit loose?
No, that would do the same thing, and they've been talking about bringing it back, but politics kind of shut it down, and then the rep who introduced it has not brought it to the floor yet. It's just politics.
Gotcha.
Well, I was talking to a coach, and he was telling me about some what do you call them? Proposals to government about that, exactly, about like health insurance for fighters. Like it's going to Washington D.C., right? Like this is what I heard from a coach. Like they're like pushing for that.
It's ready to be introduced to like the actual Senate or House floor, but the main thing is, and I don't want to dive too far into politics here, but like it was going well until Trump was elected. Well, I mean lobbyists, but then Trump was elected, and Trump is friends with Dana White, right?
Oh yeah.
And so like then suddenly it just gets put on the shelf for 4 years, and now you've got another election coming up where Trump may be the Republican nominee again, and so like my guess is it would be the end of next year after the election, like if right, or if like what all the other batshit crazy things happening in politics with Trump, like until he's completely out of politics or he's like not going to be a factor, I don't think it gets introduced because there's that's a very complex.
American stupid fucking politics. We can skip that part.
Yeah, we can skip that.
So basically, Dana White's gonna be pushing for Trump hard when this election comes up. Guarantee he's gonna be doing some speeches or something somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Just to pay his bills, basically.
He never brought any other former president cage side. Like he's the only one.
Well, he's not buddies with them, right? I think he's known Trump for a while, so
I'm just saying, like in
Trump,
general, right? Like it's the president.
Trump was a huge proponent of the UFC, like hosting the UFC back early.
Oh yeah, back in his old hotels back in the day, yeah.
So they got roots, man. Roots they hold tighter than anything, man. These guys. But yeah, like I'm excited to see what happens. You know what I mean? Do I want it to happen? To be honest, I don't really care, like if it happens or not, because we're gonna watch fighting no matter what, right? It's just fighting. There's promotions all over the world, but when you look at the roster, right? Let's take it. Let's dive into this last, and we'll take off. When you look at the roster and you rank rosters, right? Like you rank number 1 UFC. Let's say UFC is number 1. Number 2 is Bellator. Number 3 is One Championship. Where does PFL rank along the global promotions roster wise? They're probably at the bottom, right?
I mean, depends. Like, I guess it depends on like depth or tops. I mean, even I would say in terms of recognized,
right? Yeah, recognizable names.
Recognizable names, yes, I'd say they're near the bottom. I mean, you could argue that they're ahead of one, like depending on the region, right? And like just depending, like there's been enough especially now they brought in Anthony Pettis, they brought in Shane Burgos, like they brought in former UFC guys. You could argue now that they're at 3, maybe 2 if you're really pushing it. But like, yeah, I mean, in terms of like actual skill depth, I don't know. Like that's part of it gets real dicey. Like
it does. But then if you add the Bellator roster, they're clearly number 2.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You put Bellator and PFL
together.
Yes. Yeah. You put Bellator and PFL together, they're clearly the number 2 roster. The only issue with that in terms of translating that into money is that like the UFC has talked about this. They have 8 tiers of people they target, right? From like super hardcore, watches every MMA thing, to a person that buys a fight once every like 2 years. Like they buy a McGregor fight. That's it. Like the problem is basically in tier, I think 7 and 6, right? Like that's where you start to lose anyone that's not UFC because of the brand power that they have and the marketing power that they have. And so like, on the very rare occasion, you get somebody in like 5 that might like see a notable name from the UFC or it's a big enough hype. They're like, okay, I'll check this out. But so like, even if you combine PFL and Bellator, like right? Everybody talked about how they thought McKee beating Patricio Pitbull was like his Conor McGregor moment. He was going to be a star or whatever. Nothing happened. Like they just don't have the reach with the general casual fan. And so it helps you become number 2, but you still have to find a way to break out of that problem. Like Kayla Harrison, PFL pushed her as the woman, right? Like that's our star. But ratings never reflected that, right? Like she didn't get, like it never translated well. Like, and that's the problem. That
they wanted Ronda Rousey type of hype around it.
Yeah.
And it just never happened.
Right. Like, yeah, it's.
And it's funny that you say that because I think you're super right. You know, when I host the watch parties for these different events, there's a massive drop off, dude. Like everybody shows up for the UFC fights, and then it's a very small portion. And I think it's equal when I hold one or PFL or Bellator. It's just the small contingent of fans that like each. It's almost like a shared, whatever's left is shared almost equally amongst the rest of them. But when it comes to recognizing fighters, I think one does have the advantage with recognizing stars, if you will. I think they have a little bit more. When you talk about people wanting to give a shit that it's on, people actually care to see PFL because they don't have to know the roster. They don't care. They just want to see the tournament or how it's playing out. Who's making $1 million? That's the common person's question. Oh, who's fighting for $1 million? Bellator, people have kind of checked out. Unless you're a former UFC star, it's not really going in that column. So with all that being said, I think it's going to be great if there's actual like a rivalry happens, kind of like the vintage, since we used pro wrestling analogies earlier, when WCW finally got to rival WWE for that small period of time. It was magical for everybody. So I guess in a weird childhood reflective kind of way, I hope the same thing happens in MMA, where we have a strong number 2 that creates a healthy rivalry, and all that happens is we, the fans, get the benefits of it all.
Let's go out with this. Francis Ngannou, Jake Paul, Clarissa Shields. Those are kind of like the staples for that pay-per-view thing, that pay-per-view model that they got coming up. That's what I'm most interested about out of everything that's going on, more than the purchase, is to see what type of numbers they're able to attract on a pay-per-view competing against the UFC, right? I want to see what because they're going to try to be more open about it, right? Because they want to show that they're competing against them and saying like a competitor, not like, oh, we're just part of the category, we're just part of the sport. No, we're actually competing. So that's going to be interesting as well. Thank you, Pat, man, for coming on. Everybody, if you want more NFL or UFC, PFL, Bellator, One Championship news, go in the descriptions, download the AllStar app, follow everything on there, interviews with fighters. Even if you watch the NFL, NBA, whatever, you can customize the app to your liking, and also make picks on every UFC event. Join JSpec's League. Watch the watch along parties with JSpec and Sicko Sports. Follow Pat at All Day OJ and JSpec the host on Twitter. And we'll see you guys next week. What's next week? UFC.
Grasso Shevchenko.
Yes.
UFC.
Noche UFC. We'll be back next Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, for a recap of that. And peace, love, and whatever.